You stop believing in magic the day you have to decide between paying the electric bill and buying diapers. Romance? That's a luxury tax I stopped affording 5 years ago. So when the man in the $5,000 coat asked to share my booth, I didn't expect a fairy tale. I just wanted to finish my fries. The neon sign outside Mel's Diner buzzed with a low, dying hum. Half the letters were burnt out, leaving the pink glow to spell out ML's in R, which felt appropriate. We were all a little broken inside this place. It was 9:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. Tuesdays were my holy grail. My mother took Toby overnight so I could work a double shift at the dental clinic, but tonight the dentist left early for a golf weekend. I had a rare, impossible gift. 3 hours of empty time and $20 of tip money that wasn't earmarked for preschool lunches or the gas bill. I didn't want to go home to my quiet apartment and stare at the pile of laundry on the sofa. I wanted a hot meal I didn't have to cook, and I wanted to eat it without someone asking me to wipe up spilled apple juice. I sat in the back corner booth. The vinyl seat was patched with silver duct tape. I ran my thumb over the frayed edge of the tape, letting the sheer mundane reality of it ground me. A plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes sat in front of me, drowning in a brown gravy that probably came from a powdered packet. It tasted like heaven. Then, the sky cracked open. It wasn't a gradual drizzle. The rain hit the city like a drop bucket. Within seconds, the diner door chimed, a frantic, high-pitched jingle, and a wave of people shoved their way inside. People who had been waiting at the bus stop, people walking their dogs, delivery guys clutching soaked paper bags. The quiet, empty diner transformed into a damp, chaotic locker room smelling of wet wool and cheap umbrellas. Every stool at the counter filled up. Every booth was packed. The noise level rose from a low murmur to a frantic chatter. I hunched over my meatloaf, building a defensive wall with my posture. Don't look at me. Don't ask to sit here. I have 45 minutes left of my freedom. The door chimed again. I didn't look up right away. I was too busy carving a perfect forkful of potato. But the shift in the room's energy made me lift my eyes. He didn't belong here. It was the first thing anyone would notice. He was soaked to the bone, water dripping from the hem of a dark charcoal overcoat that draped with the kind of heavy, flawless structure that screamed bespoke. His hair, dark and peppered with gray at the temples, was plastered to his forehead. He wasn't looking at the menu board. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He looked like a man who had been walking blind and just bumped into a wall. He stood near the register, chest rising and falling beneath a dark turtleneck. His eyes scanned the room. They were pale, a sharp cold blue, but completely hollowed out. I knew that look. I saw it in the mirror every time my bank account dipped below $10. It was the look of a person who had hit the absolute limit of what they could carry. His gaze moved past the crowded counter, past the family of four squeezing into a two-top, and landed on my booth, the only booth with a whole empty bench facing the wall. No, I thought. Please, no. He started walking. His shoes, leather, probably Italian, definitely ruined by the puddles, squeaked slightly against the black and white checkered linoleum. He didn't have the swagger of a rich guy intruding on a poor neighborhood. He walked with a heavy, dragging limp of pure exhaustion. He stopped at the edge of my table. Up close, the details were sharper. The faint scent of rain, cedar, and an expensive scotch. The dark circles under his eyes, bruised into his skin like thumbprints. A faint white scar cutting through his left eyebrow. I gripped my fork. If you're looking to sell me a watch, I'm tapped out. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He just stared down at the empty red vinyl bench opposite me, then looked at my face. I thought I'd be eating dinner alone, he said. His voice was a low rumble, worn ragged at the edges. But there's nowhere else. Can we sit here for a while? He didn't ask, "Can I sit here?" He asked, "Can we sit here?" Like we were already in this together. I looked around. The waitress Glenda was balancing 3 pots of coffee and glaring at the standing room crowd. There was a guy shivering by the jukebox who looked like he might actually throw up. If I said no to the guy in the coat, Glenda would just seat someone else here anyway. I moved my purse off the table and slid it onto the bench next to me. "Keep your elbows on your side of the sugar packets," I said. He let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating, unbuttoned his soaked coat, and slid into the booth. We didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. It was a very specific kind of silence. Usually, when you sit across from a stranger, there's a buzzing tension, a need to acknowledge the awkwardness, to make small talk about the weather or the slow service. But he just sat there. He took off his coat, folded it with surprising care, considering it was dripping wet, and set it on the edge of the seat. Underneath, his black turtleneck clung to his shoulders. He leaned back against the duct tape vinyl, closed his eyes, and pressed the heels of his hands against his temples. I kept eating my meatloaf. I wasn't going to let some runaway Wall Street guy ruin my one hot meal, but I watched him over the rim of my water glass. His watch caught the harsh fluorescent light. A Patek Philippe. You learn a few things working a front desk in an upscale dental clinic. That watch cost more than my apartment building. Yet, his knuckles were white, gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. Glenda materialized at our table, slamming 2 laminated menus down. "Coffee's fresh. Kitchen's backed up by 20 minutes for anything fried," she barked, not bothering with her usual sweet tart routine. The crowd had her stressed. The man opened his eyes. He looked at the menu as if it were written in ancient Sumerian. "Just coffee, black, and whatever pie is oldest." Glenda raised a drawn-on eyebrow. "We got cherry from yesterday. Crust is a little soft." "Perfect," he said. She poured a heavy ceramic mug full of pitch-black coffee, slid it toward him, and vanished into the sea of wet coats. He wrapped both hands around the mug. He didn't drink. He just let the heat soak into his palms. "You're going to get pneumonia," I said. The words slipped out before I could stop them. The mother reflex. I cursed myself internally. I was supposed to be ignoring him. He looked down at his damp sweater. That might be a relief. Pneumonia requires bed rest, doesn't it? Usually, and antibiotics, which are expensive, but I'm guessing your copay isn't a problem. A tiny dry huff of air escaped his nose. A laugh, barely. "No, the copay isn't the problem." He took a sip of the coffee. He winced. Mel's coffee was essentially battery acid, warmed over a Bunsen burner. But he swallowed it and took another sip. I pushed my empty plate aside. My time was ticking down. "So, you get lost. The financial district is about 40 blocks south, and the steakhouse with the valet parking is 3 avenues over." "I'm exactly where I want to be," he said, setting the mug down. His blue eyes locked onto mine. There was no arrogance in them, just a crushing, flat exhaustion. Anonymous, dry. and entirely uninteresting to anyone in this room. Don't flatter yourself. The watch is interesting. He glanced at his wrist, then unclasped the watch. He dropped it casually into the pocket of his wet coat. Better? I don't care what time it is, pal. I'm just telling you, you stick out like a sore thumb. I reached into my bag to pull out my wallet. As I did, a plastic stegosaurus tumbled out, clattering loudly against the formica table, followed by a handful of crushed goldfish crackers and a folded, brightly colored drawing. I froze. I quickly swept the cracker crumbs into my hand and snatched up the dinosaur. He didn't look away. His eyes settled on the drawing that had landed near his coffee cup. It was a chaotic scribble of green and purple crayon. "Dinosaur phase?" he asked. His voice dropped half an octave, losing some of the brittle edge. "Yeah," I muttered, shoving the stegosaurus back into my bag. "Everything is spikes and teeth right now, including him." "How old?" "6. He reached out and tapped the corner of the drawing with a long, clean index finger. "A good age. They still think you can fix everything." I stopped fishing for my wallet. I looked up at him. There was something intensely hollow in the way he said it. Not nostalgic. Grieving. "They do," I said quietly. "Until they figure out you can't even fix the toaster." "Or a failing heart," he murmured. The diner clattered around us. Plates crashing, someone laughing too loud at the counter, the rain lashing against the glass. But in our booth, the air went completely still. He pulled his hand back, as if he'd touched a hot stove. He grabbed his coffee mug again. "Forgive me. I don't usually talk to strangers." "I don't usually let strange men in wet $5,000 coats sit at my table," I countered. "I'm Nora." He hesitated. He looked at the window, at the dark street outside, then back to me. "Atlas." "Well, Atlas," I said, leaning back, "your old cherry pie is here." Glenda slid a plate onto the table. The pie looked sad. The crust was indeed soggy, the filling bleeding out into a sticky red puddle. Atlas picked up his fork, cut a piece, and ate it. He closed his eyes. "Awful?" I asked. "Completely," he said, opening his eyes. A genuine tiny smile touched the corner of his mouth. "It's the best thing I've had all year." Atlas ate the pie with the slow, deliberate focus of a man who hadn't chewed his own food in a decade. I sat there, nursing the dregs of my water glass, watching him. I should have asked for the check. I should have walked out into the rain and caught the bus back to my apartment. But the rain was coming down in sheets, and something about this man anchored me to the vinyl seat. "So, Atlas," I said, breaking the rhythm of his fork, "you're going to tell me what a guy who wears cashmere in a thunderstorm is doing, running away from his own life?" He stopped chewing. He laid the fork down perfectly parallel to the edge of the plate, the businessman instinct bleeding through the exhaustion. "Who said I was running away? You walked in here looking like you were being hunted, and you took your watch off just because I looked at it. You're hiding." He leaned his head back against the booth, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles. "You're very observant, Nora." "I work a front desk at a clinic. I spend 8 hours a day watching people lie about flossing. You get good at reading tells." He let out a short, dry laugh. "I suppose you do." He rubbed his face with both hands, dragging the skin down. When he looked back at me, the corporate mask was entirely gone. He just looked like a tired, middle-aged man. "3 blocks from here," Atlas began, his voice barely rising above the diner's clamor, "there is a ballroom in the St. Regis Hotel. Inside that ballroom, there are about 200 people eating dry salmon and waiting for me to stand up at a podium. A speech. An announcement, he corrected. He picked up a sugar packet, turning it over and over in his fingers. My company acquired a competitor last month. It was hostile. It was ugly. And tomorrow morning, we are liquidating their assets. Tonight was supposed to be a celebratory dinner for my board, a victory lap. And instead, you're eating day-old cherry pie in a place that smells like old grease. I was standing in the hallway, Atlas said, his eyes unfocusing, looking past me, listening to the clinking glasses. I had my speech in my breast pocket. I was going to walk out there and tell a room full of millionaires how much richer they were about to be. And then I thought about the 400 people who work in the manufacturing plant we're shutting down in Ohio. I didn't say anything. I just watched him. I signed the papers a week ago, he continued, the sugar packet crinkling between his thumbs. I didn't lose a wink of sleep over it. It's the job. It's numbers on a spreadsheet. Inefficiencies, redundancies. But tonight, I stood by those double doors and I couldn't breathe. It felt like someone had poured concrete into my lungs. I handed my speech to my VP, turned around, walked out the fire exit, and just kept walking. The sugar packet split open. White crystals spilled across the dark formica. Atlas stared at it, then slowly brushed the sugar into his hand. "So," I said, my voice flat, "you had a crisis of conscience. A little late for the guys in Ohio, isn't it?" He flinched. It was a microscopic tightening of his jaw, but I saw it. I wasn't going to coddle him. I knew what it felt like to be on the other side of a spreadsheet. When the clinic cut my hours last year, they called it a schedule optimization. I called it choosing between heat and groceries. "You're right," he said quietly. "It is." "And what happens tomorrow?" I asked. "The sun comes up," Atlas said bitterly. "The plant closes. The board calls for my head because I abandoned them at a gala. The stock dips. Life goes on." He looked at me, a sharp intensity returning to his eyes. "You think I'm a monster. That's fine. I probably am." I shook my head. "I don't think you're a monster, Atlas. Monsters don't walk out into the rain because they feel guilty. Monsters stay and eat the dry salmon." He paused, studying my face. "You don't pull your punches. Can't afford to." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, ignoring the spilled sugar. "Look, I'm a single mother. I have $22 in my checking account right now. My kid needs new winter boots, and his father sends a child support check exactly whenever he feels like it, which is almost never. My life is a constant grinding math equation that never balances." Atlas watched me, his blue eyes entirely focused. He didn't offer pity. He didn't reach for his wallet, which I was ready to shut down instantly if he did. He just listened. "I don't have the luxury of existential crises in ballrooms," I said. "If I fall apart, my kid goes hungry. So I don't fall apart. You fell apart today because you realized the math you've been doing involves human lives, and it finally caught up to you." "So what do?" he asked. The vulnerability in his voice was jarring. This man, who probably moved millions of dollars before breakfast, was asking a dental receptionist for absolution. "You don't ask me," I said plainly. "You want to fix it? Go fix it. Keep the plant open. Take a pay cut. Fight your board. I don't know your world, but I know this. Sitting in a diner hiding from the rain doesn't make you a good person. It just makes you wet." Atlas stared at me. The silence stretched again, but this time it was heavy, charged. The ambient noise of the diner faded into the background. I had stepped out of line, maybe, spoken to him in a way nobody had in years. Suddenly he smiled. It wasn't the small, broken smile from before. It was a slow, genuine curve of his lips that reached his eyes, crinkling the skin around them. "You are," he started, shaking his head. "Terrifyingly clear." "I'm tired, Atlas. Tired people don't have time for bullshit." "No," he agreed softly. "They don't." He picked up his coffee mug, holding it in a toast. "To clarity, then, and to not eating dinner alone." I hesitated, then picked up my water glass and clinked it against his thick ceramic mug. The dull thunk was oddly satisfying. "To not eating dinner alone," I echoed. The rain outside began to slow, the frantic drumming against the window easing into a steady, rhythmic tap. We sat there, the billionaire and the receptionist, separated by a spilled pile of sugar and a sticky pie plate, bound together by the strange, brief intimacy of the midnight hour. The green paper slip of the check landed face down in the center of the table, right on top of the scattered sugar crystals. The spell broke. The diner around us rushed back in. The clatter of silverware. Glenda shouting an order for a patty melt over the pass. The low drone of the jukebox playing a song from 3 decades ago. The heavy suspended reality we had built in our booth evaporated, replaced by the harsh fluorescent truth of 10:15 p.m. My time was up. Atlas reached for the check. His hand was quick, the muscle memory of a man accustomed to taking charge. My hand was quicker. I slapped my palm flat over the damp paper, pinning it to the formica. He stopped, his fingers brushing the back of my knuckles. The contact was startlingly warm. He looked up, his pale blue eyes questioning. "Nora, let me." "We go Dutch," I said, pulling the check toward my side of the table and flipping it over. $24.50. Atlas let out a soft, exasperated breath. "I'm a CEO, or at least I am until tomorrow morning. I think I can handle a diner tab." "And I'm a grown woman who pays her own way," I shot back, keeping my voice level. "I told you, I don't do charity. You didn't buy my time, and you didn't buy my advice. Half." He studied my face. I knew what he was looking for. He was looking for the performative modesty most people showed right before they let the rich guy pay anyway. But I was dead serious. If he paid for my meal, I became a transaction. A quaint little story he could tell his wealthy friends about the gritty, honest single mom he met in the slums, who gave him a new perspective on life. I wasn't going to be his anecdote. Atlas slowly pulled his hand back. He understood. It was a small concession, but in that moment it felt massive. He reached inside his damp coat and pulled out a sleek black leather wallet. It was entirely ruined, the leather warped and swollen from the rain. He opened it, ignoring the row of heavy metal credit cards, and pulled out a crisp, albeit slightly damp, $50 bill. He placed it on the table. "My half," he said quietly. "And the tip, unless you have an objection to me over-tipping Glenda?" I looked over at Glenda, who was currently rubbing her temples, while a drunk guy complained about the lack of avocado toast. "Glenda earned it tonight," I said. I pulled 2 crumpled 10s and a 5 from my purse, smoothing them out on the table next to a bill. Atlas slid out of the booth. He picked up his ruined coat, throwing it over his arm. The heavy, expensive wool dragged on the floor, but he didn't seem to care. I grabbed my purse, hoisted the strap over my shoulder, and followed him toward the door. We stepped out into the night. The storm had broken, leaving the city slick and gleaming under the amber glow of the streetlights. The air smelled of wet asphalt, exhaust, and the sharp ozone tang of a cracked sky. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees. I pulled my thin cardigan tighter across my chest, shivering instantly. Atlas stood on the curb, looking up and down the avenue. He pulled his phone from his trouser pocket. The screen was black. He pressed the power button a few times, then let out a short, hollow laugh. "Waterlogged," he said, holding it up. "Completely dead." "Welcome to the analog world," I said, pointing down the street. "The subway is 3 blocks south. If you want a cab, you'll have better luck walking over to 6th Avenue. The drivers don't like coming down this street after 10. He didn't look at the street. He looked at me. The harsh neon light from the diner's sign washed over half his face, catching the silver in his hair and the deep, exhausted lines around his mouth. The corporate armor was entirely gone. He just looked like a man standing on a wet sidewalk. "Will I see you again?" he asked. The question hung in the damp air. It wasn't a line. There was no smooth, practiced charm in his delivery. He sounded like he genuinely needed to know. I shifted my weight, feeling the damp cold seeping through the thin soles of my sneakers. "Atlas, billionaires and dental receptionists don't usually run in the same circles. Unless you need a root canal, I doubt we're going to bump into each other at the grocery store." "I don't care about circles," he said, taking a half step closer. "I'm asking you." I looked into his eyes. I thought about the crushing weight of my routine. The alarm at 5:30 a.m., the frantic rush to get Toby to his grandmother's, the endless stream of angry patients, the constant suffocating math of survival. A man like Atlas didn't fit into that equation. He would only disrupt it, and I couldn't afford to be disrupted. But then I thought about the last hour. For the first time in 5 years, I hadn't just been Toby's mom, or the girl at the front desk. I had just been Nora, and he had actually listened to me. I reached into my purse, pulled out a pen, and grabbed a damp napkin from the pocket of my cardigan. I clicked the pen, scribbled a string of numbers, and held it out to him. "I work Tuesdays until 9, I said. "I usually get the meatloaf." Atlas took the napkin. He looked at the numbers, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, right over his heart. "Nora," he said, testing the weight of my name one last time. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said, stepping back toward the bus shelter. "You still have to face your board tomorrow. Go figure out your math, Atlas." He offered me a single, resolute nod. Then he turned and began walking toward 6th Avenue. I watched him go. A man in a ruined $5,000 coat, walking with a heavy limp, disappearing into the neon glare of the city. I didn't wait to see if he found a cab. The M14 bus groaned to a halt in front of me, its hydraulic doors hissing open, pulling me back into my reality. The next 10 days were a blur of aggressive normalcy. Toby's dinosaur phase evolved into an obsessive shark phase, which meant I spent my evenings cutting sandwiches into the shape of dorsal fins while he chased the cat around the apartment snapping his teeth. The heating coil in my building's water boiler died, leaving us with lukewarm showers for 3 days. Dr. Miller decided to double book his afternoon slots to make up for a golf trip, turning the clinic waiting room into a hostile, crowded war zone. I was exhausted. My feet ached with a deep, pulsing throb that didn't go away even when I lay down at night. I didn't have the time or the energy to think about the man in the diner, but I did. I caught myself looking at the empty leather chairs in the clinic lobby, wondering if he was sitting in some glass-walled boardroom, signing away the livelihoods of 400 people. I wondered if he had woken up the next morning, put on a dry suit, bought a new Patek Philippe, and laughed off his brief moment of weakness. That was how the world worked, right? The rich got richer, the poor stayed tired, and moments of profound human connection in greasy diners were just anomalies. Glitches in the matrix. By the second week, my cynicism had completely built its walls back up. I convinced myself I had made him up, or at least exaggerated him. He was just a stressed guy who needed to vent. He wasn't going to blow up his life because a receptionist told him to. It was a Thursday afternoon when the walls cracked. I was sitting in the tiny break room behind the reception desk, eating a bruised apple and scrolling mindlessly through the news on my phone. The headlines were the usual noise: politics, traffic, weather. Then, my thumb stopped over a business article from a major financial outlet. Caldwell Industries CEO Atlas Hayes Scuttle's liquidation plan faces board revolt. The half-chewed bite of apple turned to ash in my mouth. I clicked the link, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. The article was dense with financial jargon, but the core narrative was crystal clear. Atlas Hayes had walked into a board meeting the morning after the gala and halted the planned liquidation of an Ohio manufacturing firm. When the board threatened a vote of no confidence, Atlas had leveraged his own personal shares to bridge the financial gap, effectively absorbing the financial blow himself to keep the plant operational and the jobs secure. The fallout was massive. The stock had dipped. The board was furious. Analysts were calling it a baffling, emotionally driven maneuver that proved Hayes had lost his killer instinct. The final paragraph noted that Hayes had agreed to step down as CEO, transitioning to a silent advisory role, a polite corporate execution. I read the article 3 times. My hands were shaking. He did it. He actually blew it up. He chose the human math. "Nora!" Dr. Miller's voice barked from the hallway. "Line 2 is holding, and Mrs. Gable is complaining about the wait time." I locked my phone screen and tossed it into my locker. I stood up, smoothed down my scrubs, and walked back out to the front desk. I smiled at Mrs. Gable. I answered line 2. I did my job. But for the rest of the day, there was a strange, buoyant lightness in my chest, a crack of sunlight in a dark room. The following Tuesday arrived. My mother had Toby. I had my $20. At 9:15 p.m., I pushed open the door to Mel's Diner. It was a quiet night. No rain, no crowds, just the regulars hunched over their coffees, bathed in the sickly pink glow of the failing neon sign. I walked to the back corner and slid into the duct-taped vinyl booth. Glenda walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Meatloaf?" "You know it," I said. She poured my water and walked away. I sat there, staring at the empty red bench across from me. I pulled my phone out. No missed calls, no texts from unknown numbers. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of foolishness. What did I expect? A grand romantic gesture? The man had just lost his company. He was probably surrounded by lawyers and accountants fighting for his life. A damp napkin with a phone number was probably at the bottom of a Manhattan landfill. My meatloaf arrived. I picked up my fork and cut a piece, drowning it in the brown gravy. The diner door chimed. A soft single ring. I didn't look up. I took a bite of potatoes, staring resolutely at my plate. I heard footsteps, the scuff of shoes against the linoleum. Not the squeak of ruined Italian leather. Just normal, quiet footsteps. They stopped at the edge of my table. I raised my eyes. Atlas stood there. He wasn't wearing a bespoke coat or a cashmere turtleneck. He was wearing dark jeans, a plain gray sweater, and a canvas jacket. He looked 10 years younger. The dark bruises under his eyes had faded, and the rigid, suffocating tension that had radiated from his shoulders was entirely gone. He looked normal. He looked human. He smiled, not the broken, desperate smile from the storm. A real, warm smile that reached his pale blue eyes. "I thought I'd be eating dinner alone," he said, his voice steady and clear. I put my fork down. The breath caught in my throat, but I forced my face to stay neutral. "I don't know," I said. "This booth is pretty exclusive. Are you hiding from anyone tonight?" Atlas chuckled, a deep, resonant sound. "Just the paparazzi and a few angry hedge fund managers. But I think I lost them on the subway." He slid into the booth opposite me. He didn't take up as much space this time. He didn't carry the weight of a dying empire with him. "You took the subway?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I did. 2 trains. Only got turned around once." He leaned his forearms on the table, folding his hands together. He looked at my plate. "I see you didn't wait for me." "A girl's got to eat, Atlas, and I didn't know if you were coming." "I told you I didn't care about circles, Nora." His eyes locked onto mine, shedding the playful banter. The intensity was still there, but it wasn't frantic anymore. It was focused, grounded. I wanted to call, but the last 10 days have been complicated. "I saw the news," I said quietly. Atlas broke eye contact for a second, looking down at his hands. "Ah, yes, well, the financial press hasn't been kind. They think I've lost my mind." "Have you?" He looked back up at me. "No. For the first time in 20 years, I think I found it." He paused, a vulnerability bleeding into his voice. "I saved the plant, Nora. I secured the jobs. The company is under new management, and I am officially unemployed, but the math balances." "I know," I said. "I read the numbers. You took a massive hit." "It was just money," he said, shrugging slightly. "I have more than enough left. The point is, I slept through the night last week. A full 8 hours, without pills, without waking up feeling like I couldn't breathe." He reached across the table, his fingers stopping just an inch from mine. "You told me to go fix it, so I did." I looked at his hand, resting near mine on the cheap, sticky formica. "I didn't pull away. I didn't do it," I said softly. "I just told you what you already knew. You're the one who walked into the fire." "Maybe," Atlas said. "But I wouldn't have found the door if you hadn't pointed it out." Glenda walked over, holding a menu. She looked at Atlas, squinting. "You're the wet guy from last week." "I am." Atlas smiled up at her. "Much drier today." "You want the cherry pie again? We got fresh apple today." "No pie tonight," Atlas said. He looked across the table at me. "I think I'd like the meatloaf, if it's as good as my friend makes it look." "It's mediocre at best," I said. "Perfect," Atlas said. "I'll have the meatloaf." Glenda nodded and walked away. Atlas settled back into the booth. The diner hummed around us, safe and warm. We didn't talk about million-dollar deals, and we didn't talk about overdue electric bills. We just sat there, 2 people from opposite ends of the earth, anchored together in the quiet sanctuary of a Tuesday night. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like. I still had to wake up at 5:30 a.m. My life was still going to be hard. Atlas wasn't a magic wand, and I wasn't a damsel in distress. We were just 2 flawed, tired adults trying to find a little bit of grace in a grinding world. He looked at me, a soft, genuine warmth radiating from him. "So," Atlas said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small, flat box of crayons and slid it across the table. "I read up on 6-year-olds. The shark phase is next, right? I made sure this pack has 3 different shades of blue." I looked at the crayons, then up at him. A slow, honest smile broke across my face. "Yeah, Atlas," I said, sliding the box toward me. "The shark phase is next. Let's see if you can keep up. If this story struck a chord with you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to let us know you want more grounded, real, and deeply human stories. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that real connection doesn't require a fairy tale, just honesty and a little bit of courage. Make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next upload. What would you do in Nora's shoes? Let us know below.